This is a download from the BBC. To find out more and for our terms of use, please go to bbc.co.uk. Hello. When I was 15 and in love and my girlfriend was going away for the whole of the summer, I played Carole King's It Might As Well Rain Until September over and over again. Music is a key to memory, but perhaps some memories should stay under lock and key.
My husband Ian, he did say to me, wow, I didn't know you did that, and did you go there? And I think he was rather surprised at some of the things I did say.
Alison Duncan, one of the many contributors to Radio 2's The People's Songs. More from her later. Old people's memories are often extremely rich, but we don't always want to listen to them. We have your reactions to a groundbreaking radio drama which puts their thoughts into the mouths of children.
My daughter asked me the other day, what's the best thing about getting old? I said, nothing. She said, nothing. I said, nothing. There's not one good thing about getting old. And I'm 80 tomorrow.
We'll also reveal which news programmes can't tell a virus from a bacterium. But before all that, last week the Crown Prosecution Service published its first ever study into false allegations of rape and domestic violence, showing, it said, that such false claims are a very small percentage of the overall figure and rarer than you might think. Here's how it was reported on radios 2, 4 and 5.
The Crown Prosecution Service says false allegations of rape and domestic violence in England and Wales are less common than previously thought. The CPS commissioned new research which looked at the number of prosecutions for the offences over 17 months compared with the number of false claims.
The Director of Public Prosecutions, Keir Starmer, has warned that police may not be pursuing rape allegations as rigorously as they should because they fear some women may be making it up. He gave the warning as the Crown Prosecution Service published figures for England and Wales showing that, on average, 2 people a month are prosecuted.
Here on 5 Live. Also today, myth-busting research from the Crown Prosecution Service in England and Wales suggests people lie about being raped far less often than we think. It's devastating, though, for those who are falsely accused.
I got a phone call from a police officer and he said...
However, the same morning, Radio 1's Newsbeat reported the same issue rather differently.
2 people a month on average are being prosecuted for falsely accusing someone of raping them. For the first time, the Crown Prosecution Service have looked at how widespread the problem is. Keir Starmer is head of the CPS.
Over half of the cases we looked at
one of Newsbeat's breakfast show reports, which gave listeners little, if any, clue that figures for false claims were a drop in the ocean compared to those found to be true. Many Radio 1 listeners were quick to voice their concerns about that coverage, with a flurry of tweets and comments on Newsbeat's Facebook page, as well as emails to feedback.
Adam Sargent, by failing to balance your report in any meaningful way, you continue to promote damaging myths about false rape claims and perpetuate the culture in which rape victims are disbelieved. We would all agree that those who bring false allegations should bear responsibility for the culture of doubt and disbelief and should be dealt with severely, but you don't have to perpetuate this apologist culture.
Sophie Thompson. It's interesting to see the BBC website and now Newsbeat have put a totally different slant on this report to the BBC Radio 4 news report and the papers I've seen. Their take was, quite rightly, that false reports of rape are far lower than previously thought and that the police need to up their game when it comes to investigating reports and not hide behind the potential false report excuse.
The Crown Prosecution Service was also concerned.
While the Radio 1 report was in some way balanced by the quotes from the Director of Public Prosecutions, saying that prosecutions for false allegations were serious but rare, the editorial stance taken was disappointing. However, the immediate and public reaction of many of those who read and listened to the Newsbeat coverage caused the programme to acknowledge this, and we were pleased that by the time the report ran in full at lunchtime, these comments were being taken on board.
About this story, many tweets to @BBC Newsbeat today. And Declan, this seems to have made some people contacting us very angry.
Yes, lots of people have been criticising us on Twitter. They say reporting these figures makes us biased towards the accused person and we're not making it clear how rare these false accusations are. A few said we could stop real rape.
Chris Smith has been the presenter of Newsbeat for the last 5 years. I asked him if he thought his programme's coverage of the CPS report had been fair and accurate.
Well, our report wasn't prompted by the figures from the Crown Prosecution Service. It's not like the figures came out from the CPS and we decided to do the story at that point. This is a story which Newsbeat had been working on for almost a year, since April 2012, because we'd heard from our largely teenage audience, and the men among them, that this was an issue of concern for them. The fact that, although it is extremely rare, as the CPS figures show, false accusations of rape do happen. They're a devastating thing when they do happen, and we felt that that was worthy of reporting.
It's not a question of whether it's worthy of the reporting, it's the prominence you give to it and the context in which you place it. And the CPS report says very, very clearly that prosecutions for false allegations of rape are minuscule in number, serious in nature, minuscule in number. Anybody listening to the Newsbeat programme might not have got that impression, might they?
Well, I think they would, Roger, because they would have heard me say a few seconds into the beginning of the report, we're looking at men who get falsely accused of rape. It's a rare problem. But the Crown Prosecution Service has told Newsbeat that when it does happen, it's devastating. That's the script from the day, which I wrote and agreed with the editor.
But another way of doing it, and some of our listeners think you should have done it this way, is to say there are a large number of rapes in this country, a lot, however, go underreported, but very few false allegations of rape are reported and prosecutions take place. Therefore, although we must be concerned about those who are falsely accused, by far the major concern must be those who were raped.
This wasn't a news story about actual rapes, something we cover a lot on Newsbeat, and of course we know how devastating it is.
Even though you had the CPS report, which was everybody else reported as a major news story.
They may have done some reactive journalism after the CPS report came out, but we'd been working for almost a year on a story about false accusations of rape, and that's what our story was on the day. And we made it very clear how rare they are.
You've had some criticism, as you know.
Of course.
You do know, because on your own website, and to us as well, Alison Golding says, Newsbeat then write a story which is all about emphasising false rape allegations and aims it at young people who are very often the victims of sexual violence. Can reporting get more biased, inaccurate and plain wrong than that? Another person, Kelly Jane Keane, has a similar reaction and says, Newsbeat, don't you have any responsibility to your young audience? Many more of your members of your young audience will be raped than will make false allegations of rape.
Absolutely. We were running a whole series on teen mental health last week, and one of those reports dealt with a rape survivor who was attacked when she was just 11 years old. And it's an issue that we do deal with on Newsbeat a lot. It's not on the day always a numbers game, unfortunately. If we're going to report false accusations of rape, we have to do a proper piece of journalism about that admittedly rare story. It's not always possible in one news programme to put everything into a global context. We haven't covered the story in the 5 years that I've worked at Newsbeat before. We may well not cover it again for the next 5 years. So I hope that the context will, over a long period of time, add up. But on the day, if we're going to cover this story, we've got to cover this story, and I think we did make it clear how rare it is.
Chris Smith, the presenter of Newsbeat. Now, whenever I hear the song Walking Back to Happiness by Helen Shapiro, it reminds me of a miserable French exchange I endured with a student who thought Napoleon had won the Battle of Waterloo. And Genesis' Follow You, Follow Me is what my wife and I said to each other soon after we met. Ah, it's amazing how potent cheap music can be. I wish that was an original remark, but Noel Coward said it first. Plenty of other music fans have been sharing their melodic memories as part of Stuart Maconie's Radio 2 series, The People's Songs, which tells the social history of post-war Britain through 50 pop records. And what's in those programmes is largely determined by listeners. We wanted to find out more about how the programmes are being put together and how some of the listeners who contributed felt about taking part. So, once upon a time, as a cold wind blew the freezing rain onto the Manchester Ship Canal, Stuart Maconie pushed through the doors of BBC North and stepped into the lift.
We're on the third floor of Dock House, I have to remember then, at Media City in Salford, which is our glittering new futuristic home. Say hello, everyone. Hello. And this is the white heat of our creative nucleus. With all due respect to all the people who've made big pop music documentaries in the past, they've been made before. To make it different from everything that had gone before, I thought I want to do British social history tour from the point of view of ordinary British people. I want to hear the voices of the people who bought these records, who danced to these records, who got married to these records, who fell in love with these records, who went on strike to these records. That's the real story of British pop music, and hopefully we're getting that. Were you working? Hello, Lorna. We've come to talk to you. Lorna is doing really all the hard work. Lorna's doing lots of stuff, including doing loads of the interviews, which are really at the heart of the radio programme.
We've done, as it stands at the moment, 99 interviews. We've got our 100th interview tomorrow.
So where have you been recently? Because you've been going all over the country, haven't you?
Everywhere. Where have I been recently? I've been up to Glasgow, I've been down to London and Brighton. Yeah, we've travelled quite a bit, actually, so it's been good.
My name's Alison Duncan. I live in Suffolk.
This is a history told not by rock journalists, professional pundits or media darlings, and certainly not by celebrities, but the Radio 2 listener.
I first heard about People's Songs when I was listening to Radio 2, and I just thought, right, OK, I'll type out an email and let people know what I liked and what influenced me. So far, I think the main contribution was the Je t'aime one a couple of weeks ago. Je t'aime, je t'aime, oui, je t'aime. The things I've said in that interview, I'd sort of forgotten about. It's the music that reminds you of certain times in your life. My husband Ian, he did say to me, wow, I didn't know you did that, and did you go there? And I think he was rather surprised at some of the things I did say. Je t'aime, je t'aime,
oui, je t'aime. People shouldn't feel that, people need to be really knowledgeable or experts about music. We want to talk to people about all different aspects of their lives, and all it needs really is a quiet room and a recorder, a microphone, a cup of tea, and we're off.
My name's Chris, and I'm from Chesterfield. Well, I first heard about the People's Songs via the BBC's website and realised that there were some episodes there where I seemed to have a direct connection with, the main one being A White Shade of Pale.
We skip the light fandango.
The main memory that I'd got from that time was being on holiday in Devon in 1967 and my first encounter with hippies.
And they came into our carriage and they were all laughing and joking and the bells were tinkling and they were enjoying themselves, but everybody else in the carriage was sort of totally on edge, thinking, what are they going to do?
When I was being interviewed, I was conscious of two things. One, that I felt that I was gabbling and that I needed to slow down and speak more clearly. And when I heard myself actually on the radio, I was quite pleased that I seemed to come over as that I knew what I was talking about.
Those voices are never really heard in rock and pop music documentaries. We hear a lot of middle-aged men, and I say that as someone horribly who has to concede that he's a middle-aged man. We hear a lot of middle-aged men giving us chapter and verse of the official rock critic history. I'd much rather hear those people telling me about what it was like to grow up Jamaican in Handsworth and Birmingham, or what it was like to be a goth in the 1980s. And I just think pop music is woven into ordinary people's lives in a way that no other art form has been. And I think there's an argument for saying that pop music is the ultimate democratic art form of our time.
I still don't understand what White Shade of Pale is about, but never mind. You can find out how to contribute your own memories and to nominate what you think should be the final song of the series via the Radio 2 website. Why don't you contact me as well to tell me what you think of anything you've heard on BBC Radio? You can send an email to feedback@bbc.co.uk or tweet BBCR4Feedback. Or you can write to Feedback, PO Box 67234, London SE1 P4AX. Or you could leave a phone message on 03 333 444 544. Normal landline charges apply, but some mobile networks might charge more. All those details are on our website. Now, the broadcasting of science, an issue which regularly pops up in the feedback inbox. The last BBC Trust review into how the BBC does science said the corporation's coverage was of high quality, but it also expressed concern about an over-reliance on press releases and the disproportionate representation of male experts in relation to the actual numbers of male and female scientists. The report led to the appointment of veteran science correspondent David Shukman as the BBC's first-ever science editor. Well, that was over a year ago, so I met up with him to find out what he's managed to achieve in that time. Mind you, he doesn't have a management role, and he has no budget. So I asked him, what power did he actually have to make a difference to the BBC's coverage of science?
I don't think I have any power, but I do hope I have some influence, mainly as a voice speaking up for science coverage. I mean, the thing I've found in the last year is that it's very useful sometimes to be able to go to programmes, to editors, to lay out why something that an editor has seen in a newspaper isn't quite what they think it is, or indeed to flag up a story which at first sight to them might look dull, but which I can say, actually, you need to do this.
You see, we had some concerns for listeners. Let me put to you one from R.P. Gruchias. He said there's a real difference between a real scientific breakthrough, which only occurs occasionally, and the desperate hyperbole of scientists who believe that they have to keep listeners focused on their science for the money to keep flowing. So you acknowledge there are scientists who are involved in a PR exercise concerned with ensuring they have a job.
More than that, scientists often work for institutions that are desperate for a public relations profile, and we are bombarded with over-eager press releases which often use the word breakthrough. I've got an allergic reaction to the word breakthrough. I think we should hardly ever use it. And in many stories it suggests a kind of eureka moment with a sort of, particularly in the medical world, an instant treatment next Tuesday. And usually it's 5 or 10 years away.
Well, you may remember that last week some of our listeners were concerned about an item in the Today programme, and it was based upon a story in the online version of The Lancet, talking about the relationship between people's genetic makeup and their liability to have some sort of mental illness. Some of our listeners interpreted the item, and certainly the introduction, as saying, it's a breakthrough, there is now a connection, a major connection between genes and mental illness. What did you think when you heard that?
Well, there's a real tension between getting science advances on the news, which suggests it is a big step, and providing context to make sure that everybody understands how this fits in to the general flow of research in that particular area. It's very difficult in a limited time to give that context. We have to do what we can to try to provide that, though. Now, the papers obviously can be fallible, but they have gone through the process of peer review. Again, that's no guarantee of it being right. Then it's gone through the process of publication in a reputable journal, which is a second hurdle that the science has to cross.
But that's you and the people in the science unit. When you're dealing with Common and Garden presenters, shall we say, perhaps as on the Today programme, there are problems. Simon Gillespie says that on Friday, March the 15th, a newscaster stated that scientists were interested in finding out more about the plague virus from bodies unearthed by the Crossrail project. Plague is, of course, caused by bacterium. I wonder whether the BBC has a larger problem here. They're addressing it in part through the science unit, but there's a larger problem with Common and Garden presenters, journalists and people like I would have been, that actually the BBC needs to take on an educational role within the organisation.
We've tried to do that. So since the Trust review into science in June the year before last, the College of Journalism, which is the BBC's internal training academy, has set up a science education programme, which is meant for senior journalists and presenters to go on. It's not mandatory, it's voluntary, but everyone's encouraged to do it. I had a hand with other colleagues in helping contribute to it. People who go on it, who are general journalists, by the end of it, ought to have a better understanding of how to distinguish an exaggerated, overexcited press release from a legitimate piece of peer-reviewed, published science, at the very least. It should provide a basic understanding of how science works, how breakthroughs are very, very rare and should not be used very often as a term. It should also give them a sense of where they can go to get background information, reliable help and advice on certain stories.
And would you recommend that prominent presenters go as well as perhaps relatively junior producers?
I would like as many people as possible to go on this thing, and I'm not sure who's been and who hasn't.
How do you ensure that you do original research and you get original stories and not those that are put in front of you by interested parties? Your numbers aren't increasing, shall we put it that way? And with so many outlets that you have to service, you just can't go AWOL for a week and sit down in a conference and really burn up on something, because editors from all over the BBC will be shouting down and leaving messages saying, "Where are you?"
There's a constant tension. Editors may, in theory, be sympathetic to the idea of, yes, it would be very valuable for David to hang around with NASA for a few days. In reality, they need you in the newsroom to do stories here and now. Having said that, I think we do have a pretty good record of unearthing stories which others don't have. It's partly because many of us have done this kind of work for years. I mean, I've been covering science for the BBC for now a decade, and in that time you build up contacts, you follow stories up, and in that way you can try to keep one step ahead of other people, you can try and get under the skin of some of the processes that are happening, and then therefore come up with stories which you hope are interesting to audiences.
David Shugman, the BBC's science editor. Now, I am ageless, of course, but many Radio 4 listeners are already within sight of retirement or actually retired. And last week, a House of Lords inquiry said Britain is woefully underprepared to cope with the anticipated population explosion among the older generations, and recommended that the retirement age be raised. Oh dear, at this rate you may never be rid of me. The effervescent and irreverent Now Show dealt with this news in a song performed by comedian Mitch Benn. He's often very funny, and often very close to the bone, but this time some listeners think he went too far.
Society is gonna collapse pretty soon, and here's why.
This is Sally Astana near Carmarthen. Normally I do enjoy the Now Show and usually listen to the repeat as well, but this week it has left me twice as irritated because of Mitch Benn's appeal to put older people onto the slab.
The one thing we can do is bring some old diseases back.
I'm Simon Parker from Bunbury. I'm young myself, I'm 14. Though I don't find the prospect of growing old a nice one, I feel that one can grow old gracefully and not growing old in a care home where nobody cares about you.
Who wants to fade out in a care home all feeble and vague? When you can go out in style from cholera or bubonic plague.
My name is Chris Wainhouse. We cannot help our age. The generations need to be pulled together and not divided. I did turn it off after that, and I will never listen again.
Get them off benefits, put them where they belong on a slab.
Too cruel? Mitch Benn's song may have had Chris Wainhouse reaching for the off switch, but over on Radio 3 last Saturday, some listeners thought that the subject of an ageing population was dealt with far greater sensitivity, in a new drama by Fiona Evans called The Startling Truths of Old World Sparrows.
Please, God, don't let it happen today or tomorrow. Please don't let it happen in front of my children, or Faye, or Millie, or William. Please, God, don't let this unexploded bomb go off.
The drama was based on the verbatim testimony of 3 octogenarians, but used child actors to voice the words of people at least 70 years older than they are.
Hello, I'm Wendy Niblock, I'm from Glasgow, and I was completely blown away by the piece. The choice of using children's voices to me was a work of genius, and I was moved to tears by it.
They're not the same carers all the time. There's a different one that comes lunchtime from the one that came at breakfast.
Well, I'm Wendy Sturgis, and I live in Woking. I myself am 80. They seemed able to penetrate the minds of the elderly, and despite their own limited knowledge of life, they empathised with the struggles and worries experienced by those nearing the end of life.
I'm on my knees, slumped by the armchair. I'm struggling to catch my breath, grasping at my chest. And I look so very old, so very frightened.
Hello, this is Jill Myers from the Peak District. If I'd been listening to older actors, I possibly would have switched off. The fact that it was youngsters talking made me really sit up, listen and think. We would think it was disgusting to leave a child at home on its own between meals without any company day in, day out, with just the TV remote and telephone just out of reach. And this was quite heart-wrenching and thought-provoking, hearing thoughts, feelings and worries that elderly people have through the voice of a child. I wasn't due to visit my mum until next week, but as a result of listening to the play, it made me get into the car and drive to see my mum the next day. And I'm there now and just had a lovely morning going through some photos with her and reminiscing and trying to make the most of the time that we do have together.
It looks as though what must have seemed a considerable gamble came off triumphantly. I asked the writer, Fiona Evans, why she'd chosen to use child actors.
What I wanted to create was a real empathy with older people. And by using the voices of children, it's almost a shorthand way of doing that. It's quite arresting to hear a child speaking the words of an older person. And I think your brain becomes more active rather than passive in the process of listening. So you almost engage more with the material.
Did it come as a bolt out the blue? I mean, where did it come from?
I've done a lot of research with older people recently, and people would often talk about the childhood and they would say, you know, it seems just like yesterday. It's almost as if your life passes so quickly and you go from being 8 to 80 in the blink of an eye almost. So it was really that, I think, that inspired it.
What struck me, I think, was the fact that here you had children talking about things that they can't have experienced. How did you go about making sure that they sounded as if they knew what they were talking about?
Well, I mean, that was really all down to Pauline Harris, who was the producer and director on the piece. Say, for instance, with Ellis, who plays Ron, Pauline got him to imagine having to stay in the same place all day and not move out of a chair, which really made it accessible. It's really odd that what happened in the studio, the young people really seemed to inhabit the characters, and I think that's because they had a real strong connection with their own grandparents as well, so they almost related it to their grandparents and the characters' experiences to what they knew.
Do you also want to have an impact on people's attitude to those who are in old age?
Oh, absolutely. You know, what people have said about wanting to visit their relatives, you know, I think that's really positive. You know, I visit my mum more often. I pick up the phone more often and give her a call because I know how important that is to her now. And sometimes we forget in our busy lives.
Our thanks to writer Fiona Evans and to all of you who got in touch. I'm afraid I've told this programme's producers that I am not happy about the idea of a child reading my words. I'm not old enough for that yet, so please listen next week to see who has won that argument. Goodbye. Old people's memories are often extremely rich, but we don't always want to listen to them. We have your reactions to a groundbreaking radio drama which puts their thoughts into the mouths of children.
My daughter asked me the other day, "What's the best thing about getting old?" I said, "Nothing." She said, "Nothing." I said, "Nothing. There's not one good thing about getting old. And I'm 80 tomorrow."
We'll also reveal which news programmes can't tell a virus from a bacterium. But before all that, last week the Crown Prosecution Service published its first ever study into false allegations of rape and domestic violence, showing, it said, that such false claims are a very small percentage of the overall figure and rarer than you might think. Here's how it was.
By failing to balance your report in any meaningful way, you continue to promote damaging myths about false rape claims and perpetuate the culture in which rape victims are disbelieved. We would all agree that those who bring false allegations should bear responsibility for the culture of doubt and disbelief and should be dealt with severely, but you don't have to perpetuate this apologist culture.
Sophie Thompson. It's interesting to see the BBC website and now Newsbeat have put a totally different slant on this report to the BBC Radio 4 news report and the papers I've seen. Their take was, quite rightly, that false reports of rape are far lower than previously thought and that the police need to up their game when it comes to...
Think. It's devastating, though, for those who are falsely accused.
I got a phone call from a police officer and he said...
However, the same morning, Radio 1's Newsbeat reported the same issue rather differently.
2 people a month on average are being prosecuted for falsely accusing someone of raping them. For the first time, the Crown Prosecution Service have looked at how widespread the problem is. Keir Starmer is head of the CPS.
Over half of the cases we looked at
One of Newsbeat's breakfast show reports, which gave listeners little, if any, clue that figures for false claims were a drop in the ocean compared to those found to be true. Many Radio 1 listeners were quick to voice their concerns about that coverage, with a flurry of tweets and comments on Newsbeat's Facebook page, as well as emails to feedback.
Adam Sargent
was reported on radios 2, 4 and 5.
The Crown Prosecution Service says false allegations of rape and domestic violence in England and Wales are less common than previously thought. The CPS commissioned new research which looked at the number of prosecutions for the offences over 17 months compared with the number of false claims.
The Director of Public Prosecutions, Keir Starmer, has warned that police may not be pursuing rape allegations as rigorously as they should because they fear some women may be making it up. He gave the warning as the Crown Prosecution Service published figures for England and Wales showing that, on average, 2 people a month are prosecuted.
On 5 Live. Also today, myth-busting research from the Crown Prosecution Service in England and Wales suggests people lie about being raped far less often than we...
This is a download from the BBC. To find out more and for our terms of use, please go to bbc.co.uk. Hello. When I was 15 and in love and my girlfriend was going away for the whole of the summer, I played Carole King's It Might As Well Rain Until September over and over again. Music is a key to memory, but perhaps some memories should stay under lock and key.
My husband Ian, he did say to me, wow, I didn't know you did that, and did you go there? And I think he was rather surprised at some of the things I did say.
Alison Duncan, one of the many contributors to Radio 2's The People's Songs. More from her later.